Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Isaac Newton Institute podcast. My name is Dan Aspel, and I'm the Communications Manager here at INI. And this time around, our guest is Professor Julia Gog. Now, Professor Gog works at the University of Cambridge. In fact, if I were to throw a stone from the institute, I would be able to hit the building containing her office. So she specialises in modelling the spread of infectious diseases, particularly pandemic influenza. Consequently, she's been very busy over the past few months. She's become a member of SPIM, the Specialist Pandemic Modelling Group that feeds into SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, all of which has been informing the UK government. There are a number of other things which are happening in Julia's life at the moment, including being awarded the Royal Society Rosalind Franklin Award. We're going to be talking to her about that and many other things besides. We hope you enjoyed the episode. So Julia has been a regular at the Institute over the past few months because you've been one of the organisers of the programme which has been running throughout the summer despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And that was rather fittingly Infectious Dynamics of Pandemics. So not only that, but Julia has also recently received an award from the Royal Society, the Rosalind Franklin Award and Lectureship for work in mathematics and disease modelling. So it seems to me it's been a really, really busy period for you, Julia.
It's been an absolutely bonkers year. So the Newton Institute workshop we've got is not so much despite the pandemic, it's because of the pandemic. It's absolutely a response to what's happening in 2020 and bringing the maths community together to do what we can for it.
And that was organised, my understanding is at a very late notice, really. I mean, really sudden organisation, much more so than any of these programmes usually, the process they usually go through. So how was that?
Oh, amazing. So I was involved, we had an infectious disease workshop, which itself was a 25 years on workshop from the first year of the Newton Institute. There was a very influential long programme on infectious disease modelling, which is very key for our field. And we had this follow-up 25 years later. And I wasn't one of the original organisers, I should say. I was an undergrad at the time. But I was one for the follow-up meeting. So in some sense, we had that community around the Newton Institute already existing. And the organisation, I wouldn't say so much last minute because, you can't really plan for pandemics, but it reacted very quickly to the news of a pandemic and understanding that existing programmes couldn't happen in anything like the planned form in person. But instead, the Institute very nimbly moved to create this online programme. And we've learnt as we've gone along on how best to do this, but it's been adaptive and we've got it working. There's been lots of amazing things happening in the programme. So
how many times would you say you've attended events at the Newton Institute under normal circumstances?
Oh, so I work in the Centre for Mathematical Sciences, so I'm literally next door. So I'm in several times a year, every year, for whatever's going on. Sometimes officially registered, sometimes I might just sneak into something. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But I do.
Well, as long as you tell reception, you're fine. Let me ask you then, as you're so familiar with how the Institute normally runs, how has it been for you operating this virtual programme?
Well, it wasn't clear how to do this in advance. We didn't have years or weeks or days to plan for it. We just sort of got on with it with an understanding that we'd do 1 week and see how it went and work out how to do the next week. So there's all kinds of logistics of it. I mean, there's things that make it easier, right? So you haven't had to get the participants here from around the world. People haven't had to book time off work or whatever, or to take the sabbatical to coincide with this. In some sense, the participants are there and ready. There are lots of participants who are involved in government responses in various countries. So there's some things that made it easier. Then also the scientific planning of it. It's not, again, something we could sit down and have worked out. This week's going to be on this week's going to be on that. But rather it's been reacting to themes that have emerged over the last few months. There's some places where we've been able to plan ahead a little bit, but there's other things where we've been very reactive and moving around with that.
Yeah, and there are lots of questions that stem from that, I think. And one would be the work that you normally do. It's all fascinating and vital and important in its own way. But this must feel really, really quite unique, I would have thought, in terms of what you're doing is immediately needed by, as you say, government agencies in the home countries of some of the participants. I mean, what does that feel like to work on something which is so vital immediately?
It's a very, very different experience to normal. It's not just that the timescale of when it's needed, it's what the motivation and drive is behind what you're doing. I'd say most of the time, yes, we're looking to policy and applications. The point of studying infectious disease in the end is to be able to control them for humans or wildlife or agricultural needs. But this is not so much looking into the distance, it's reacting now. And that's a very different thing to, you can follow your curiosity, you can think about something, you can go off on a tangent, you can put something to one side because it's too difficult. And work by, well, what all of us would recognise as the natural research way of doing things. This is very different. It's reactive. So I'm on SPI-M, which is the modelling committee that feeds into SAGE as part of the government response to coronavirus and offering the scientific advice to the government. Working as part of that is very different to normal day job, because there may be a question that comes down, maybe I'll make something more concrete, like, for example, if you think back to April or whatever, is it safe to open schools or not? If I was working on that as a straight researcher, I'd be saying there isn't enough information to answer that, so I can't answer that, so I'm clearly not going to be working on that or writing anything about it. But you've got a question, it needs answered soon, and it needs answered with the best evidence that you've got. And it's always full of caveats saying, assuming this, assuming that, our best estimate is this, and to answer that better, you'd need to know that. And that is different for us to be able to have to react in that way. And it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. But it's not boring. I'll give it that.
No, I can imagine. How much of your work, let's say since March, has been with government groups?
Basically 100% of my time has been looking that way. I've been released from my day job both in the maths faculty and in Queen's College in order to focus on this 100%. So my eyes have been very much on what do we need to do for advice, what's the questions now. But I am a researcher, and for me to function even in this sort of reactive role, I need to connect back to my research community. And that's what the Newton Institute has given me, a way to reach out to the wider community, to hear about what's going on in wider research around the UK and around the world, and to be able to bring topics and discussion to, frankly, the best people in the world to discuss some of this. And that's been so important.
So it's interesting that, as you say, that there was a follow-on programme to a workshop which began the INI's life about modelling of diseases, and it's being revisited now. So is it fair to say that there's a community that already existed for this programme to take place?
Very much. Very, very much so. I mean, the interesting thing is some of the original participants are organisers and co-organisers now, and very central to this programme. So that's great. So we've had this community, but it also means we've got this research base to draw upon. We're not having to reinvent everything. I can turn up at INI coffee time and say, I'm puzzled about this. And someone say, oh, yes, we know about this. We did this 20 years ago, whatever.
That sounds wonderful, yeah.
Incredible community to draw on.
What proportion of the people that you're working with are ones who you were already familiar with? I mean, how many new people have you met through this process?
Through the INI, a lot, actually. So there's a community I know very well, and a lot of people who are part of it I very much call my close friends. It sort of flash back to the workshop in person a few years ago. The key thing of the INI is you're there together, you're mixing, it's the common room dynamic and everything happening around it. And I think a lot of us remember with fondness a very late night session playing Pandemic, the board game, which we won. We had to think about it a long time, the last few steps, in order to work out what the probabilities of different cards were, and the only way that we could win.
That's really gratifying to hear, because I'm very much a tabletop gamer, and to know that top level mathematicians enjoy the games that I like is I feel honoured.
The fun thing is which of us identify with which of the roles.
Oh, of course, yeah. So who did you take? Which character did you take control of?
Oh, I'm probably a researcher, right?
Oh yeah, very good. Yeah, card control, excellent. Yeah, that's fantastic. Oh, well, that's nice to hear. So, talking about your work, and feel free to be specific, even though I'm not a mathematician. I think quite a lot of our audience may be. What parts of your research over the past few months have particularly interested you or surprised you, perhaps?
Oh, so that's a more difficult question to answer than any other time for me, because I can't talk. That's a harder question than any other time for me to answer, because I can't pin down as clearly as usual what is my research here. As I mentioned, the whole motivation of what we're doing is responding to policy, which is quite different to our usual structures of working in a few different collaborations and producing outputs. So yeah, there's a few things I've been doing in smaller groups that will be standalone publications, but a lot of what I do is working with larger groups on policy documents and commenting and reacting to things that's a bit different to usual. But the one thread that's been through this that I'll highlight, and it'll be what I'm working on in the gaps today, is the BBC Pandemic Project. So this was a huge citizen science project we ran a few years ago. There was a TV program, but as part of it, there was an app that collected a lot of data on how people move and mix in the UK. That data set we've got in, we had published some of it already, but some of it was not published as of March 2020. Yet it was going to be really useful for making pandemic models for some hypothetical pandemic a long time in the future, right?
Yeah, sure.
So we've moved quickly on that. The first thing we got out post knowing about COVID-19 was the mixing matrices of how people of different ages mix and in different contexts, and that has gone straight into pandemic modelling. Used by multiple groups. Actually, thinking about that, that's still in a preprint server, and that's completely odd. Any other year, we would have got around to submitting it to a journal, and we just haven't. It's sitting there on medRxiv, but the data is there for others to lift and use. We're trying to wrap up something now with some of the spatial dynamics. That's a bit more complicated because we need to get that into a format and do some analysis to compare that to other mixing matrices of how people move around the UK, and to give some information about when you'd want to use our data set as opposed to any other, or when it might modify what you're doing. So there we've got to sort of make it so that researchers who are making spatial models, who are already swamped, they don't have time to read every detail or reproduce everything. We need to make it so they can lift it and use it.
Yeah. Well, just from a layman's point of view, has that data surprised you in any way, or has it been as you'd expected, how people mix within the country, different age groups, all that kind of stuff? Has that been as you would logically assume people would behave?
So the age mixing data was surprising, because there was a data set out there that we were all using already, and it's still heavily used and will still heavily be used. It's called Polymod. It's the absolute gold standard in how you do this. What we got with the BBC data set was a much larger number of people sampled. So we got more resolution, but there was a few places where it really changed from Polymod. And there's about 15 years between the two studies, so maybe it's not surprising. But in brief summary, our teenagers were a whole lot less mixy than the Polymod teenagers.
Really? Interesting.
So question is, and our study had to cut off below the age of 13. So we had 13 and up, and no 12 and younger for ethical reasons. So you wonder, is us detecting teenagers mixing less, does that mean that children are mixing less? And is that just some quirk of the people we had in our study? Probably not, because it's a massive sample size. Was it a quirk of the previous study? Perhaps, because we know that was done slightly differently. particularly for children, parents were answering on behalf of the children. Perhaps slightly different to teenagers filling in an app of what they actually did. But I suspect actually there's been a real change in mixing patterns. The rise of technology, it fits our stereotype of maybe teenagers are on their phones a little bit more than they were when they didn't have phones.
Yeah, and that's a sobering thought, isn't it? That you can actually see quite vividly that teenagers are spending less time with older people. That can't be a positive thing, I imagine.
Well, spending less time with each other as well, actually.
Right, yeah.
No, it's not a positive thing in terms of, the social dynamics of it and the well-being and psychology. But, in terms of pandemic dynamics.
Then it's great, yeah. Yeah, very interesting, though, because that sort of raises issues for people from other fields to investigate, doesn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah. Now, what an interesting time. And as I say, the information which spills out from this there must be too much to take on board, I imagine, too many avenues to pursue, and there's simply no time currently.
Indeed, not enough time to do. You start on something, think this is interesting, I want to continue it. No, we've delivered the document we need. We've got to move on to the next thing. And it's frustrating. I don't have time to read the literature properly either. It's a mega luxury for me to be able to sit down and read a paper from start to end. So I try and choose wisely which papers I do that with. The rest, honestly, I'm skimming them and asking colleagues what they think. We've also been lucky. We've got a rapid review system through the RAMP. Actually, maybe I should explain what RAMP is first.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So it's Rapid Assistance in Modelling the Pandemic. This was a Royal Society initiative, which I'm part of the steering committee that set this up. This is, in March, you've got this thing where the pandemic is kicking off. There can't be a human on Earth who hasn't noticed it. Actually, that's not true. There can't be a person in this country who hasn't noticed it. And you've got workplaces closed, we're sent home. But do you know what? Academics want to help. Mathematicians, anyone in quantitative sciences wants to do something to help. But how do you do that starting from no background in the area? So RAMP was a way of coordinating that goodwill and that time to help, to connect it up. So it would be useful for modelling the pandemic for policy. One of the functions of RAMP has been a rapid review system. So either they identify a paper or a preprint that's become important, or we can ping something over, perhaps with specific questions and saying, can you tell us how this fits with this? Or can you give us a review of the quality of this? So that's been a way of, rather than just having one set of eyes, having hundreds of sets of eyes on the literature.
Gosh, that is very inspiring, I have to say.
It's incredible to have all the support, but to work in this way is really new. And alongside things like the way we've done the virtual programme for the Newton Institute, you start to think, okay, there are elements of this. We've had to do it this way because we've had no choice. We can't do it in person. But there are elements you think, okay, maybe this is good in general. Maybe we can keep this. This is something that could be valuable for the future. Yeah,
absolutely. And to move on ever so slightly, because I'm aware that I'd like you to get back to your work. That you mentioned the Royal Society there in association with RAMP. As I mentioned at the beginning of our chat, you were recently awarded the Rosalind Franklin Award. And I just wanted to get your reaction to that. How did you feel about receiving that news?
Oh, you can see me grinning. It's been an absolute beam of light in some really difficult months. Absolute joy. Super happy. You might know it comes with some money to do a project, basically. And the project we had planned, and I was mega keen to do before the pandemic, and has become rather more relevant, was to work with the Millennium Maths Project, which of course are based in the Faculty of Mathematics here as well, so very local, to put together resources for use in schools. And we're focusing on Key Stage 3, so the early part of secondary education, thinking about the mathematics of pandemics, but to address things within the curriculum for that age group. So rather than it being some bonus stuff which is done after school or outside school, we can connect in the ideas of epidemic modelling into things which are on the curriculum, and hopefully that way help to bring the curriculum to life, to show some of the things that you can do with mathematics. And we had lots of agendas with this, but most of all, it's interesting and fun, right?
Yeah.
And on the one hand, wouldn't it have been amazing if we had this in hand, ready for 2020, everyone studying at home, that we could just roll this out, lots of online resources to go. On the other hand, we would have had to have rewritten everything in the light of COVID-19, right? So where you talk about pandemics would change a bit. The science behind them is moving faster than it's ever moved. I'm not sure whether that would change things that we would have done, but I think my gut feeling is it probably would. And certainly the way I would communicate a lot of this is different. You don't need to start any discussion now with a public audience by introducing the concept of R0, which they've never, ever heard of before, right? It's out there. It's a public concept. Maybe you have to talk about it to clarify exactly what we mean by it, and its uses and abuses. But how much of this is in the public's eye at the moment, including school children, is rather different. So you don't need to introduce so many concepts.
I'm guessing that with the grant given by the Rosalind Franklin Award, you were free to choose any project that you wanted to work on. So it's really interesting to me that you chose to essentially invest in secondary school education for the country. So where did that motivation come from?
Well, that's after discussions with the Millennium Maths Project. I've worked with them on quite a few bits over the years, actually. And we were thinking about particularly what stage of education we could most usefully offer something. And part of the agenda there is we're focused on the girls, right? So when do girls drift away from mathematics in general? When does that happen? And this is discussions I had with Julia Hawkins and Ems Lord. Ems has done her own research into this area, of course. And they identified that, on the whole, primary mathematics education is not losing the attention of the girls. By the time we get to sixth form, there's a different set of issues. It's probably too late in some ways to influence attitudes towards mathematics by the time people are partway through their A-levels. There's different things we need to do there in terms of outreach, particularly thinking about university admissions and attracting people. But the dip might come early in secondary. So we've got to the end of primary and then switch to secondary. It's a slightly different world. It's a slightly different curriculum, which can appear very disconnected from the mathematics having any purpose. Just for clarity, I love maths in general. I don't think mathematics has to be useful. But I think when you're studying maths at that age, to see that it can connect in to offering something which can help change the world for a better, or well, I think I sound more and more weird after 20, but to influence policy, right? So
Sure.
To be able to use mathematics to say, should we reopen schools or not?
Yeah.
To connect what they're studying in the classroom with that. I think that's very motivating, I think, for girls or anyone of that age to be able to make those connections.
Yeah, I agree completely. And to return to your example of Pandemic, the board game, I think it's fascinating to me to see that people. I've seen Pandemic on shelves of people who would never dream of going near a high-end board game. You see it alongside Catan and Monopoly. So it's just interesting to me that even pre-pandemic, I think people were very interested in that as a concept. I don't think it's just that it's a good and approachable board game. I think it is something which anyone can get on board with in terms of the flavour and the theme, and so seeing that, I think that's what you're doing is a fantastic using this huge negative situation to actually prove to people how absolutely essential the mathematics is to combating it.
Well, we have yet to make this and deliver this, and there's lots of challenges ahead in how we do that. But you'll see me smiling because I'm really excited about doing this. Yeah. Really looking forward to it. I mean, we'll be doing some pilot work. Well, we had planned to be doing some pilot work with local schools, and I'm sure we will to some extent. there'll be a bit of interaction and feedback, and we'll see how things go down, and know if we need to change things around a bit. We've done schools projects before, though, and I remember being really, really surprised by how much school kids can do. Right, if you frame things in the right way, and then they get their minds onto it, they get it. And I'll give you one example that's very relevant to this Newton programme. Some years ago, we did this project which involved getting the secondary school kids to go and study the primary school kids for their feeder schools and get their social networks. And it's about, it's about the dynamics of how people mix. But as part of that, in the first round that we did it, we went to go and visit the primary schools to give them a talk, partly to explain what we're doing and partly as a thank you to run an interactive session with the kids. And one of those was a school in South Wales that we'd gone to. And we did this game where we got the kids into a circle and they were each holding a bit of wool connected to each other. And they'll just give a little tug on the wool to infect the next person, right? And we're showing when there's lots of short pieces of wool, it took quite a long time to get around the classroom. And you put a few long pieces of wool across the circle, suddenly the time to reach everyone is much, much shorter. It's small world dynamics or network dynamics. You create these long range links and the whole thing has shrunk in some sense in terms of how many degrees of separation people are. And I remember one of my colleagues sort of explaining this to the kids and had taken the brave step of connecting it to the activity before, which was a game where one person chooses two people and they each choose two people. And that's an R naught of 2. And he'd made some comment that you've got, certain number of, at that point, it would be 2 pieces of wool coming out. So it's a bit like R naught of 2. But he'd given a sort of under the breath throwaway remark saying, but it's not exactly like that for networks. And that's a cheeky remark, which I'm sure most of my colleagues stumble over, except for those who really work on network dynamics of infectious disease. The R naught is slightly different there, right? It doesn't work in quite the same way as it does for something where someone picks 2, you've got a network that's established. One of the 10-year-olds put a hand up. I said, it's obviously not the same as the thing we did with the standing thing, because if I get infected, one of my pieces of wool has been used because it's coming inward, so I can't infect that way. So no matter what happens, it's going to be one less than the number of pieces of wool I've got. It's like, what? You're 10. This confuses my colleagues. I think,
that's
okay,
wonderful.
so actually kids, if they're allowed to think about it in the right way, they can get incredible amount of insights.
Yeah. Did you give that child your card?
I thought I'm going to clock you for 8 years' time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll remember you. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, it's no wonder that you want to continue in that trend and continue working with young people in schools. Going back to what you said earlier, just before we round off this chat, it's really fascinating you saying about how A-level is too late, because obviously it's too late, because in this country at least, I know that educational systems vary across the world, but if you don't choose to do maths A-level or AS level or whatever it is now when you're 16, you're not going to university to study maths. So it's really quite early in your life that you're giving that up, or the opportunity to keep pursuing it. So, I mean, that's quite a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's true in general. There's always the opportunity to go back and do things slightly different and be a mature student, of course. So it's not the only opportunity, but for most people, it is the only opportunity.
It certainly feels that way when you're 16, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of decisions which happen very quickly when you can't clearly see the path ahead. And I wonder now, I remember just being able to pursue what I thought was interesting, and no one steered me away from anything. I wonder now if perhaps it's a slightly different world, and the 15, 16, 17-year-olds of today are perhaps having to focus too much on what they have to do in order to earn money, i.e. for their careers in future. And yes, that's got to be part of what people need to think about, but it feels weird that teenagers have to focus on that so much.
Yes, it should very much be a case of pursue what it is that you're good at and interested in, shouldn't it? Without any greater concerns. I mean, if money were the only concern, nobody would ever study literature or philosophy.
Yes. Yeah. But the fun thing is with maths, you're definitely leaving lots of good careers open. But it shouldn't be the motivator. Well, I believe it shouldn't be the motivator. It should be because you're interested in it. But it leaves careers open, and maybe careers that you couldn't imagine before you started further study.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Julia, I'm aware that I've taken up a good portion of your morning. Thank you for lending it to us. I wanted to ask you, as a sort of wrap-up question, is there any one or thing which you would recommend to our listeners that you've been enjoying particularly over the past few weeks or months?
So you mentioned before Twitter, I think so. Yes.
So, I mean, Twitter would be a valid one. Anyone that our listeners might want to follow on social media, or indeed any programs or media which you've been enjoying particularly. So,
to be honest, Twitter scares me a bit. I have a Twitter account, but if it tweets, it's been hacked, right? So that's not me. But occasionally, with my hands over my eyes, peeping through it, I look at Twitter just to see what's going on. I got caught up in quite a strange Twitter interaction a few weeks ago. I was on the local evening news commenting on something, and I was sitting here in my college office, and it was on Zoom. And behind me was my piano with some music open on it. And I thought, I'm going to have a little... Actually, no, that's not true. I didn't have a look at Twitter. I got a text from a member of my family saying, you're going to get an email from someone called Richard Coles. Don't delete it. You need to react to that. What? So it's completely bizarre Twitter reaction to the Look East interview of the Reverend Richard Coles and his followers being obsessed about what music was on my piano.
I was going to ask you the same question because I too can see the piano now.
Okay, it's the same book that was open at that time. It's Bach's Goldberg Variations,
lovely.
Which has been my lockdown project. I haven't got very far, but it definitely calms me down. And just a few minutes on the piano, whether at home or in the office, just calms me down completely. But I certainly wasn't expecting the Twitter reaction to a news commentary to be about what's on my piano. But I now follow the Reverend Richard Coles, who of course was a former communard. So that's been entertainment. Perhaps another recommendation is the podcast More or Less. That's always been stunning, but it's been particularly amazing during COVID-19. And listening to it, it's absolutely spot on what they're talking about and who they're getting on. So I've been thoroughly enjoying that. That's worth anyone listening to.
Yeah. They had, of course, a series which never ended throughout the summer, I believe, or the end of the spring into the early summer. But they're back now with a new series, with much like the Premiership, with almost no gap. So yes, as a huge fan myself of More or Less, I thank you very much for that recommendation. And I would also encourage anyone to look that up and listen to it. It is on BBC Radio 4, but the podcast is very accessible. So it's the same content, but anytime you want it. Oh, that's fabulous. And Julia, before I let you go, here's a really tough question. How do I win at pandemic? Should I aim to eradicate one of the diseases as soon as possible? Is that like the most efficient thing to do, or should I just react to each moment as it comes?
The answer is you get a squad of 12 disease modelers, some beers, and late night in the Newton Institute, and we'll show you how to beat this thing.
Oh, well, that's an offer I can't refuse. Thank you very much. Lovely. Thank you very much, Julia. It's been a real pleasure. Professor Julia Gog, thank you for joining me on the podcast, and I look forward to seeing you in person as soon as the situation allows.
Fantastic. It's been lovely talking with you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.